Redditors who have worked around death/burial, what's your best ghost story? Story 1. I used to be a driver for a funeral home corporation. Like, drive the hearse and pick up the bodies. Never had anything creepy happen, a few funny things, a few traumatic things. In general, it was a chill job. However, I did get incredibly uncomfortable one night picking up a man who died at home. He still had the defibrillator leads on his chest and his eyes were closed, which is unusual because the eyes are always open. He just looked like he was asleep or unconscious. Not rigid or pale or anything. I just had this sinking feeling for about half an hour in traffic that he was going to suddenly gasp and wake up in the body bag. Then it hit me. That would be the coolest thing ever. I'd take him home and he'd be back with his family. So I just kind of drove slowly and turned up some music and sang along and talked to him. When I got him to the funeral home, I left him out of the cooler for about an hour while I did paperwork and played on my phone. When I got another call, I checked on him and his limbs had started to stiffen. I was kind of bummed. I put him in the cooler and went on my next call. Story 2. During my apprenticeship, I worked at a funeral home said to be haunted by an old funeral director assistant who had a heart attack in the building and died. All he ever did was mess with the chapel lights, and if you called him out, something like, "John, the family is coming, please don't," they would return to normal. Not really sure if I believe it was really haunted, but saying something always fixed the issue, so I kept doing it my entire time there. Story 3. My roomie/best bud is a mortician, and I'm around the funeral home a fair amount myself and know the staff pretty well. I've spent the night there before. Nothing weird happens there. I have had some experiences I can't explain, so I was a little surprised none of the staff ever had an odd experience, especially since some of them do believe in ghosts and whatnot. But they told me, if ghosts were real, why in the world would they linger at a funeral home? It's just a transition space, like an airport. No one wants to just stay in the damn airport. Haunt the place you died, or the people you love, or the home you never want to leave, or however it works, if it works. Who would want to linger in a funeral home they have no attachment to, that their body only visited after they already were gone? Story 4. I used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. Last offices had already been done by the night staff and the patient moved to the hospital morgue, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this whilst I got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes after, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room white as a sheet and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was, and the student told me she had been clearing out sink area in the bathroom, had glanced up and seen the deceased patient reflected in the mirror looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward she would not go near that side room. Story 5. My grandfather died a while back. One day me and a bunch of my cousins were playing in the front yard, rural area, since on weekends all the family likes to hang out together. So we're out having fun and see Lolo, grandfather, walking towards the house. We all greet him and he smiles at us. He walks up the porch into the house and hangs his hat by the door. We continue playing until we hear crying from the inside of the house and my uncle driving fast up the driveway. We all rush in to see what's going on and see everybody bunched up in the kitchen crying, telling us that Lolo died early that morning and they just found out. He lives a few towns away. We looked at each other and told the grown-ups now we just saw him come into the house. They didn't believe us, and we told them that he really did not that long ago, and he even hung up his hat by the door. So everybody rushes to the door, and his hat was hanging right where we said it was. He doesn't ever go anywhere without that hat. So me and my cousins are running all over the house calling for him, while our parents are so quiet and freaking out. He actually did die earlier that morning, and my grandmother couldn't find his hat anywhere in their house. We left the hat where it was and nobody ever touched it. Story 6. I am an ICU RN. We had a septic patient in the unit. She was 29 weeks pregnant. She went into labor on my shift, and we delivered her baby, stillborn. I did post-mortem care on the baby, retrieved the proper transport container, and walked the baby down to the morgue. It was the middle of the night. I'm in an elevator alone. I hear a baby start wailing. I absolutely lose my shit and rip open the cover, and just as I go to zip down the bag, I hear a calming male voice say, "Hush, little one, I've got you, no need to cry." The crying stopped immediately. Shaking, I opened the bag and saw exactly what I expected to see, a deceased 29-week-only baby. I am a big bearded 40-year-old ICU nurse, and that was the scariest shit I've ever experienced. No one believes me to this day. I don't even want to speculate what the crying or the voice was. God. Even typing that out, I felt my chest tightening. Story 7. Mom told me stories when I was growing up. Her first job out of nursing school was an RN in the ER of an old hospital in Virginia in the mid-1980s. There was the Man in the Hat and Patient 1. Most of the nurses had stories about them. The Man in the Hat would show up and stand outside of rooms after visiting hours. The patients often died soon after. Patient 1 was a woman in a very old hospital gown. She'd walk in the halls before entering random rooms. Those patients usually coded. They took the man to be an omen of death and the woman to be a heads-up to grab the crash cart. Story 8. I have a million that are more grotesque and gory than this one, but it stands out to me. I was once working at a mortuary and had to go pick up a man from the medical examiner's office. When you do that, at least where I'm from, you get a receipt when they release the body to you. The receipt has all of the personal belongings that are with the deceased. When I brought the man back to the office, I opened up the body bag to make sure all the belongings were there and double-checking the receipt. When I opened up the bag, I was stunned to find this dude looked almost exactly like me. He was my age, had similar tattoos in similar spots, had the same long hair I do, even had the same style of jewelry I was wearing. It took me so off guard that I stood there in an existential crisis until the embalmer came in and was like, "Hey Spartan M00, how's it going? Ah, holy shit, that guy looks like you." It's the only case I've had nightmares about. I'll be the one in the body bag with the deceased man opening me up. Story 9. I used to work in a nursing home. The residents in certain rooms would complain about a man in their room at night, but hallucinations are common in the elderly, so it wasn't really noticed. One night I was moping the dining room, which had huge windows overlooking the garden. It was around 1 a.m., so pitch black outside and low lighting inside. I had this horrible feeling of being watched, so looked up, and reflected in the window was a man behind me. He had a brown suit in, a bowler hat, and the cruelest look on his face. He grinned and his mouth was too big. This happened in seconds, and when I turned around there was obviously noon there, but I'll never forget that look of evil on his face. I paid more attention to the residents after that, and they'd all seen the same man. He just enjoyed terrorizing people. Story 10. I worked in ward nursing for 10 years. The spookiest thing that happened was a doctor hiding under the bed when I cleaned my first body and scaring the shit out of me. That definitely helped me get over the fear factor of working with the dead. Bodies groan and leak when you roll them to clean them, but that's normal. You just talk to them nicely as if they were alive, e.g., "We're just going to put you in your nicest pajamas for your son to come and say goodbye. I'll give your face a clean. I'll paint your nails fresh as I know you like them this way." On most wards there was a haunted room that staff members would avoid. They all said it was haunted because the buzzer would mysteriously off by itself. Funnily enough, it would always stop buzzing randomly after maintenance came to fix it. Story 11. I was an RN and was working in a very well-off town in MS. The hospital had 2 ICUs, with the second one being an overflow-type unit on the 3rd floor. There were 7 rooms in that unit, and room 2 was haunted. Numerous times different nurses watched something walk into the room, but the room would be empty without a patient in it. One time a nurse had an actual patient in room 2. It was about 4 a.m. and the nurse was going to do a dressing change. She took the stuff into the room and the patient asked what she was going to do. She said, Change your dressings, the patient said. Oh no, that other nurse was just in here about 30 minutes ago and did it. The nurse looked, and yes, the dressing was fresh. She went out to the desk and told the one other nurse thanks for doing that. The nurse was baffled and said, I didn't change the dressing. They both freaked out a bit. Rumor has it that an RN that had worked for the hospital a long time died in that room. The hospital is now a dorm for a big college, so fun times may be had by a bunch of college students. Story 12. I used to be a nurse assistant on a cancer floor that also served as the hospice floor. The number of times a patient would pass and be removed from a room, only to have that room's call light continue to go off without anyone inside, was just nuts. And before you say maybe the light was just damaged or moved strangely in the process of removing the body, that's the only time it would happen. Broken call lights, in any other circumstance, just wouldn't come on at all.